Welcome everyone to another exciting episode of the Tank Talk podcast. John from Kidgy Tropicals here with my partner in crime, Jason, the Professor Adams from Primetime Aquatics. Jason, I just reminded you before we pushed record what episode we're doing, and you said, oh boy, that'll be fun. That's going to be a fun one. So why don't you let everybody know what we're talking about today?
Of all the things that we're talking about today, because we kind of record a lot of podcasts in one day, this was my favorite subject. And today we're going to be talking about cichlids that you can keep in community aquariums. And this is a good one because there are some really interesting cichlids. And I promise you, there's going to be a few that you probably haven't considered before. It's going to be fun.
When it comes to the cichlids that I'm going to recommend, everyone has heard of these. There is one sleeper that doesn't get as much love as I believe that it should because its counterpart is arguably a better looking fish. But this is a fun one for me too, because for probably the first 15 years of my fish keeping journey, I never even was aware that this was an option. Like I always thought if it had the name cichlid, it had to be kept in cichlid specific aquariums, no matter what. If you mix them with community fish or fish that are friendlier, they're going to end up getting killed in all of this. And that's simply not the case. Cichlid does not mean mean. That's a good little phrase there. Maybe I should get a shirt made with that on there. Cichlid does not mean mean, but just because a fish is a cichlid doesn't mean that it's going to kill everything in the tank. Yes, they may possess a little bit worse of an attitude than some of your tetras and things like that, but they will still get along and you can intermingle them with others. And some of them you'll have even more success with if you set up the tanks a very specific way. But we'll get into all of that. We will tell you the ways the tanks need to be set up and the best combinations of these fish. But before we get to do that, or before we do it, I'm going to let the professor tell you about our channel sponsor.
Today, our channel sponsor is Fritz Aquatics. Fritz Aquatics, as you know, if you've been listening to the podcast for a while, they are one of our all-time favorite aquatics companies because they have products, they've developed products that are going to make your life easier in the fish keeping hobby. I know we always talk about the water conditioners and the Fritzzyme 7, which is top notch live nitrifying bacteria, but they do more than that. They even have wonderful little packages full of botanicals, things like catappa leaves and casseria cones and all kinds of stuff that's just going to make your tank look more natural, provide some tannins, which have antimicrobial properties, and they sell them at a reasonable price. So if you're looking for something to change up your aquarium a little bit, check out the Fritz Aquatics Botanicals because they can offer a lot of natural looking, wonderful surface area for shrimp and small fish.
There's a lot of old school, old timer fish keepers that would use words like snake oil and all of this. Oh, you don't need all those fancy chemicals. Every single thing that Fritz makes is made with a very specific purpose, and it's not snake oil. They're all required. They've got something for every situation, whether it's a problem in your tank, whether you need to buffer your water. That's another thing we've never talked about, the cichlid salts and the buffers and stuff like that they sell. Fritz's primary thing that they're known for is live bacteria and salt. They provide salt to almost all of the public aquariums in the United States and around the world. This is a huge company and a huge supporter of the entire social media community of fish content creators, YouTube, Instagram, all of it. They're a huge supporter of all of us, and so we are a huge supporter of them. But I can speak for pretty much everyone. We'd still be supporters of them, whether they were supporters of us or not, because their products are that good. So you can't go wrong when it comes to Fritz. They've got something for everyone. And, you know, if you do want to support me to another level, you can order it from our website, keepfishkeeping.com. But I always encourage you to go to your fish store first. Now, let's get into this. I'm going to give the ones, Jason, that are kind of like everybody knows they're coming. They're kind of the staple cichlids that can be kept with community fish. And the first one is probably the one that should be on the top of the list, because it could be argued that it is the most beautiful of all of them. I could make an argument for the second one on my list, but I'm talking about discus. Discus, really the only thing that discus ever pose a threat to is worms. I mean, they're not aggressive at all. Yes, they will push people around a little bit if they're breeding. If you're breeding discus, you got a good thing going there. That's a cool thing to have happen. They're not hard to breed, but if they're breeding, they might get a little aggressive to protect their young, because the young feed off of the adults. They eat off of their slime coats. So they're swarming the parents all the time when they're little fry for several weeks when they're first born. So they might get a little aggressive when it comes to that. And I think the same could be said for pretty much all of the fish on this list. If there is breeding happening, there will be some aggressive behavior. But when that's not going on, they're not going to bother a soul in the tank. You look at a discus and you don't see the word threat. I mean, they're as sweet as can be. And I don't know that there's too many tanks out there prettier than a tank full of plate size discus of all the different colors, heavily planted tank. You can have the smallest fish ever swimming right by them. They're not going to bother nobody.
Now, I love the discus. Couple things with them as we're thinking about it. Of all the fish we talk about today, they're going to require the largest aquarium. So,
absolutely.
I mean, you're looking at, I know that you've set a 6-foot tank for discus in the past. I would strongly advocate for that as well. Taller tanks are better. So at least a 125, maybe a 150 6-foot tank would be pretty awesome, because you're going to keep them in a nice group. You really want them to have a wow factor. They're also going to be the largest fish that we talk about today on our list. And by the way, I know KG Tropicals, you don't do as much as I do. A lot of species profiles. Many of the fish that are listed here today, I've talked about them at length. So if you want more information on how to care for them, keep them, you can check out Primetime Aquatics. Just type in whatever fish we're talking about and channel name, and boom, you'll get a bunch more information there. But great fish. I would also say that out of the list, and I'm looking at the list right now that you and I came up with, if there is a possibility of one of these cichlids eating a smaller fish just because it fits in their mouth, this would be number 2 in terms of possible. If you had a really, really small, like baby neons or something like that, it's possible baby neon swims by, like, well, I'm going to go ahead and grab that guy and just snack on it. But you're absolutely right. It's not a fish that's going to purposely chase down other fish, but it could be opportunistic, but most likely it's not going to happen. But a lot of color. The other thing to consider too at the discus, of all the fish we're talking about, would you say that they're probably going to require the most care in terms of water maintenance and fish tank maintenance?
Sure. I don't think they are as fragile as they were in the past. As they've gotten further and further from wild, they've become a lot more adapted to typical home aquarium water parameters. So they're not as scary, but when you see the price tag on them, that's going to be something that's going to make you say, okay, I need to take extra special care, because if one of these $90 discus dies, it always sucks when a fish dies, but it's a much bigger blow than if you lose a $4 tetra. I mean, when we're looking dollars and cents, but yeah, they've adapted extraordinarily well. In fact, one of my good friends, Discus Hans, one of the authorities on discus in the United States, worldwide, actually, I've done, this is one of those fish that I've done extensive videos on, and some of the videos that I've done are with him touring his facility. I've talked about him a lot in this podcast about his water changing system and all that kind of stuff. But he's also, I don't know anybody since the unfortunate passing of Jack Watley. I don't know that there's a more knowledgeable person in the US about discus. Definitely encourage people to check out his website. It is discusfishsales.com. I'm pretty sure, or Discus Fish Sales USA. I'll put a link in the description if I remember. Hopefully I do. Or you can just search Discus Hans and it'll definitely pop up. He is amazing. And I would buy a fish from him any day of the week. And we've had quite a few discus from him. Do you want to get into the German versus Asian? I mean, do we want to open that can of
I
worms
don't know
or?
enough about the discus to comment on that. I mean, if
Okay.
you want to, you can, but and I don't know if people necessarily, I don't know if they care or not, but if you'd
Well,
like to, sure.
I'll mention it briefly because this is something that is a very, very big debate in the discus community. Whenever you have a community that's centered around a particular fish, whether it's the betta community, the shrimp community, you get some pretty serious debates in those communities. There is a big debate what's better, Asian or Germans. The Germans are known for breeding their discus in tap water. Now, this might not mean a lot to people now, but back in the day, everybody was terrified of discus because you had to adjust your water parameters. Needed to be super soft, needed to be pH of like 5.5 because they were so close in generations to the wild caught fish. You had to do that. I mean, they hadn't adapted to tap water yet, but the Germans have definitely kind of set the bar for adapting their fish to standard tap water parameters. And so the argument that I make and people on the German side would say they are hardier than the discus that come from Asia. That doesn't mean the discus from Asia aren't good. They're definitely good. I've kept a lot of them and had great success with them. So I'm not you have to go this way or you're doing it wrong. I'm not that guy. I think that in my experience, the German discus are a little less scary than the Asians, but you know, when you're paying $90 for a fish, you're going to be scared no matter what. I don't care what kind of fish it is. That's probably the biggest drawback to discus is their cost and the fact that you do need a larger tank for them. You're not going to want to put them in a 29. A lot of the fish, pretty much every other fish on this list that I have, with the exception of one, can be kept in smaller tanks, not discus. They need to be in something much larger, like Jason said. So, but I don't know that there is a fish we're going to talk about today that is going to have more of a wow factor than discus, especially if you get a bunch of varieties and you have them all in one tank and they're all huddled up together. It is a sight to behold. So yeah, discus for the win for sure. But what do you have first on your list?
So first on my list, and I'm not going in any particular order, but I'm going to start common because I want to save some of the more unusual ones for later. And that is the crebensis. The crebensis cichlid is a fish from West Africa. There's different types of, when we call them cribs, there are different species of crebensis, and they are usually all beautiful. Both the males and the females have great color. The common, I call it the common crebensis, but my gosh, when those fish are fully fired up, the females have those really purpley red bellies, and the males get a lot of purple iridescence, beautiful fins, really easy to breed. And the advantage here is they don't get very large. And so while discus are the largest of the fish we're talking about today, crebensis are definitely going to be on the smaller side, maxing out at right around maybe 3 inches or so for the males. Females a little bit smaller, a little bit plumper, slightly different colors. But this is a type of fish, if you've got a pair in a 20 long, you're good. In fact, I had an entire group in a 20 long, and they got along fine for years in that group. I think I had 5 or 6 of them in that 20 long. And the nice thing is, because they're a smaller fish, you're not worried about most of your tetra types. Those are perfectly fine. Your cory cats, your bristlenose plecos, those are all great options. They generally are going to leave those fish alone. I even had, and I don't necessarily recommend this for everybody, but I even had a betta in with my cribs, and they just ignored one another.
Wow.
Unlike the discus, you don't need any special water parameter. You don't have to keep them super warm like you do with discus. You're not worried about pH as much. They withstand a wide range of pH and water hardness, and they're just easy fish to keep. And I would say, of the fish that we're talking about here today, they might be number one in terms of hardiness and ease to keep.
They're easy for sure. I don't know that I could argue with you on that. I think I'd go with you on that. My next one on the list, which I'm not going to get into yet, is pretty daggone easy. And yeah, it's a fish that's on everybody's beginner list. But my experience with cribs has been a good one. Because they're from the continent of Africa, people associate them with African cichlids. This is a major mistake. Like, they are not going to mingle. I mean, maybe it's been done. You've kept peacocks with Oscars, but I would not recommend putting these with your peacocks, haps, and bunas, things like that. There might be some Tanganyikans that might be, I don't know. You're more of a Tanganyikan guy than me. But they're very different. They're like jewel cichlids. Yeah, they're from Africa, technically making them African cichlids, but we automatically associate African cichlids with peacocks, haps, and bunas, frontosas. These are not those. So, and just like you wouldn't want to mix these with standard African cichlids, you're not going to want to mix standard African cichlids with community fish, but you can do that with cribs. And that's what's cool about them. I love the fact that they are smaller. You can keep them in smaller tanks. I am a big tank guy. All of my tanks are 240 gallons or larger. Well, no, I just lied. I have a 75 too. But anyway, that's pretty much Lisa's taken that tank over. But you can't go wrong. They're absolutely gorgeous. There are a bunch of different types. I've never bred them, and it's mainly because I've just never really tried. I've also never tried to not breed them. It's just one of those things that hasn't happened. But yeah, this is, I think, even though the crib is a common fish, I think it's probably overlooked when it comes to the cichlids that could go with community fish. So good pull. I'm second.
And this is a fish that is extraordinarily easy to breed. So you got to be careful for two reasons. One, that means if you've got a pair, they are going to protect their territory and their fry. And two, this is unfortunately a fish where if you breed them, you may have a difficult time moving the fry, especially if they keep, because they'll do this. They'll breed and breed and breed and breed and breed. And pretty soon they're like, okay, well, the first spawn was cute and I was able to supply my local fish store with fish or get rid of them. Now, 2 weeks later, the second spawn, not so cute. 2 weeks after that, I'm overrun with cribs and I don't know what to do with these things. So we want to give you an idea. Luke, when he was a little kid, the first bag of fish he ever bought at a swap, it wasn't a swap, it was just like a fish club auction after the meeting, was a bag of 10 crips for $1. Oh, chucked them in a 75 gallon. And they were I mean, they were really small, but when they grew up, they were gorgeous fish. I mean, it was very impressive. So great fish. You just be careful. Yeah, I don't know if I'd necessarily spawn them on purpose.
They're the guppies of the cichlid world.
Yeah.
So now I just want to preface something. I'm pretty sure every single fish that we talk about on today's list, we're going to have to include in there. If they're breeding, there
Absolutely.
could be some aggression.
Yeah.
So, we don't need to keep saying it over and over
Right.
again. We need to understand that is part of the deal with all of the fish that we're talking about. And a great example of that is my next fish on the list. Everybody knows it's coming because it's one of my favorite fish in the hobby. And we're talking about angels. And this is where I have to disagree with you a little bit there, Jason, because I've seen angels way bigger than discus. Now, most people that are buying angels are going to be buying them from their local fish store. They're not going to be buying Altums. The Altums can get absolutely massive. I mean, I've seen them before where I'm like, that's not an angel. It can't be. They don't get that big. They get huge, but those are very, very rare in the hobby. Maybe not rare, but they're not going to be found in Petco's and PetSmarts. Your angels, your marbles, and your kois, and your veiltails, and those are going to be what you find at your local fish store, Petco, PetSmart, and Walmart even had them back when they sold fish. So very common. But there's another one. You said that discus require the biggest tank. I could make the argument for angels too because of their height. Mm-hmm. Now, the body of the fish might only be 4 or 5 inches, but when you include the fins, they spread out pretty high. I'm not going to tell everybody you have to go 125 minimum for angels, but I would love to see angels in a 55. I think that would be ideal for them. Worst case scenario, 29, because you get that height. But I wouldn't be putting them in 20 gallons and stuff like that. Can they survive? I suppose, but so can an Oscar in a 20-gallon tank. It doesn't mean that it's right. So we want to go big, and I would go minimum of 55 gallon. Again, almost everything that was said about discus applies to angels, except the fry don't eat from the parents. So, but they will breed readily. The telltale sign is you'll see two that'll be just like this. They'll be next to each other, and they'll probably be in the corner staring out. And then every once in a while, you'll see them turn around and start pecking at a rock or a plant leaf or even a heater. And what they're doing is they're cleaning off their spawning site where they're going to vertically lay their eggs. And then the parents will fiercely guard those eggs. And then the fry will hatch and they'll eat all the babies and they won't be mean anymore. But you have to know that instinctually, there's going to be one that's going to be right there on the eggs, and the other is going to be pushing everybody away from that site to make sure that nobody gets to their eggs because they're delicious to all of the other fish. But again, I don't think they make as big of a statement as discus because they're so common and so readily available. And a lot of people just look at them as, beginner fish, no big deal. So you see them a lot more often. They don't make that bold statement that discus will. But you get a 55 gallon or 75 gallon with a bunch of mature angels in there, boy, you got yourself a beautiful tank right there.
Yeah. And to be clear with the breeding, I mean, they don't always eat their fry. It's just like you said, the first couple spawns, they're not getting it right. They're like, oh, these are now tasty little food morsels. But once they get it right, that's another fish that can breed like crazy too. Mm-hmm. The advantage with the angelfish is the different varieties, right? There's so many different color types. You got the kois, the standards, black, marbles, blue panoy. There's green angels now. There are, half, the platinums, and you've got the half. There's just veil tail, standard fin. So there's a lot of different types. And the reason why I like them in a community type setting is, like you said, a 55 gallon at least, 55 or 75 gallon. And again, this is a fish where you can keep with a lot of smaller, the schooling tetras, your cory cats, fish like that. The only thing with both the discus and the angels I'm not a big fan of is keeping them with fish that are really, really active. It stresses them out, right? Especially the discus. But angels too, if you've got like a ton of guppies or endlers or something, they're just like pop, they're flying around, or really high energy fish like giant danios or rainbow fish. Can you keep them together? Yeah, but man, you'll start to watch those discus and angelfish just kind of stick to one part of the aquarium and like, okay, this is freaking me out over here. I don't know what's wrong with these people, these other fish. So keep that in mind if you're doing a community tank. The other thing to consider is if you do keep them in a 55 or 75, people always ask me how many angels in a 55 or 75. And my answer is safely 1. If you don't mind them pairing up, that's cool. The only issue you may have is if you wind up, I've got 3 or 4 angels. I was just dealing with this in a live stream comment, my last live stream. Guys like, hey, I've got 2 angels and they won't stop fighting. I'm like, you don't have a choice. One of them has to go either to another team or bring them back. That is your only option. They are not going to figure it out. They will eventually, they're going to figure it out only because one's going to be left. So unlike the discus, where I think in a 125, they will tolerate each other fairly well. Crebensis that we've already talked about, even in a 20 gallon, will usually figure it out. Sometimes the discus don't, or I'm sorry, the angelfish don't.
You're right.
You got to be really careful. The other thing too with veil tails, be a little aware. Like for me, I'm not putting veil tails in and then be like, hey, I'm going to do some tiger barbs or some Buenos Aires tetras or some Colombian tetras and be like, man, what the heck happened to their fins? The veil tails are all jacked up.
Yep.
So you want to be a little bit more conscious about what you're keeping with your angels if they've got, especially not the standards so much, but the veil tails, a little bit more aware. I like your choice too, because compared to discus, angelfish, they don't have to be kept as warm. So that gives you more options, right? Something we didn't really hone in on with the discus is they do have to be kept warmer.
Yeah.
Limit your choices a little bit, but in the angelfish, yeah, they can go in a smaller aquarium because their body size. Like when I said size-wise, I meant body, not including the fins, John. But when you look at just the body size, they're not quite as large as the discus, so that you can get away with that 55 or 75 gallon. Also, discus and angels, let's take it easy on the flow. Let's not have like a riverine sort of setup going on over there. Like, wow, I just blew them all in the corner. They don't really like to swim around much. That's because they can't. They're tired.
Right. Yeah, they're pretty lazy fish, both of them. They're very, very similar. They breed differently. And I think the angels are definitely more aggressive, which makes it funny that they're called angels. But I think it's easier to breed angels. And, you know, if you want to know how people breed them, they do it by combining a bunch of them in a tank and wait for them to pair off. And then they take those two pairs. Like I said, it's very easy to tell that you've got a pair. You don't know that that pair is going to be successful, but you know that they're a pair. They've chosen each other. Take those two out, wait for another pair to happen. And that's just how they do it. I'm reminded again, back to Discus Hans. He had a scenario happen in his facility years ago where he had to shut an entire system down. We don't need to get into why, because there's a lot of details, but when he restarted it, he said, I'm gonna breed some angels to, you know, get the system going again. And he called me up one day and he's like, John, I'm not going to try to fake his accent, but he's got a very distinct accent. He's from Holland. John, you got to come and see this. I happened to be in Baltimore a couple days later. I went over there. I swear to you, Jason, he had thousands of angels and they were already like silver dollar size. I mean, that man knows how to produce fish, but that's how easy it is with angels too. You start out with a couple dozen of them and you end up with a warehouse full of them faster than you can blink. And the funny thing that you mentioned earlier, I agree. What a colossal error it would be to put in fish like Danios with either of these type fish. But the most common combination you see with discus are cardinal tetras.
Yeah, but they're more relaxed.
They are, but they're
not flying.
Sometimes, I mean, they move around, but they can also sit in one place forever.
Yeah.
But, you know, the analogy that I would use there is I talk about you being so much older than me all the time. Well, I have 4 grandkids and you don't have any. So I'm the old man in the group, but my grandkids come here and I love them to death. They're so amazing. I would give my life for any one of the 4. But after about 2 hours of them bouncing off the walls and jumping off the couch, and I'm like, all right, I need to go take a break. That's what's happening if you got a bunch of rambunctious, crazy fish swimming around these angels and discus. They're super laid back like me, and they can only take all that chaos for so long before they need to excuse themselves and take a break. So just be aware of that when you're.
That was an outstanding analogy, I must say. I've never heard that before, but I'm going to probably steal it. I'll credit you. I'll properly, cite my sources, but I like that one.
It gives you an opportunity to make an old man joke, which is something that I do to you all the time. So I got it coming to me.
I can't.
What's
wait.
your next fish?
My next one is a little less common, and that is the Curviceps cichlid. Have you kept the Curviceps before?
I'm excited to hear you talk about this one because I saw that on the list and I said, does he mean Compressiceps? Because they're not going to be mixed with community fish. I'm excited to hear what the heck this fish is.
So the Curviceps is a relatively mellow cichlid. And so far, I'm looking at the list again. Out of the ones we've talked about so far, actually, it might go down as, of all the cichlids we talk about in this podcast, the least aggressive, most mellow cichlid, easygoing cichlid that we discussed. The Curviceps is it's also probably, on the flip side, the least colorful. And so they often take on this tannish kind of yellowish color depending on the substrate in the background. I actually like to keep this particular fish on a lighter substrate with a lighter background because it just tends to show off their color the best. If you keep them dark, and almost all the time, I like to go dark substrate, dark background. This one is not that way. This one tends to muddy up a lot and not look as nice, but it is a very, very mellow fish that's going to max out maybe around 3.5, 4 inches or so. And real pretty eyes. It's just going to kind of swim around the tank. They tolerate one another very, very well. It's a little chunkier than, let's say, the crebensis, a little bit taller bodied, but it's one of those fish. It's a podcast, so look up the Curviceps and you'll see what I'm talking about. They used to be really common. You used to be able to find those fish at like every local fish store. And I've noticed in the last maybe 6 or 7 years, they're much more difficult to find. But back in my day, 5 or 6 years ago, you could find them everywhere and they were cheap. Other than the crebensis, this would have been most likely the second least expensive fish on our list. Now, because they're a little bit more difficult to find, they might be slightly more expensive. And I'm talking like maybe $5, $6, $7, $8, where before they were like a $3 to $5 fish, small. But this is a nice fish. The other thing that we didn't mention that I think is important is so far on our list, we've talked about 4 fish that are all plant safe. That's huge, right?
Very
Discus,
true.
angels, the crebensis, and the curviceps for the most part will be, especially like the anubias and stuff, mostly plant safe. So easy to feed, easy to care for, and it's a nice mellow fish that, again, if you've got your tetras, your cory cats, your standard, and this fish isn't going to be stressed out like the other ones, where you could keep guppies and you could keep mollies and platies and danios. This fish wouldn't care. So it's a nice potential option.
Does this fish have like a common name, or is it common name Curvis?
That's a great question. I was thinking about that as I was talking about it. I don't remember. Let me look real fast.
That's one of the most amazing things about this hobby that I have found, is that I've been doing this for 31 years now, and I'm still live in front of millions of people on this podcast learning new things.
And I should have known this. It's called the dwarf flag cichlid, Laeticara curviceps. And it's a real kind of a pretty bluish undertone, but if you put them on a dark substrate, they're going to go brown, and it's not as pretty. But lighter substrates, I mean, if you Google this fish and Google image it, it's a pretty fish. So yeah, the dwarf flag cichlid is its common name.
Okay. Well, yeah, unfortunately, I don't have a whole lot to contribute to that because I've never heard of that fish before. But you did a fine job explaining what's involved in those. You are the man. So without your objection, unless you object, I will move on to my next one, which is probably the one on this list that, well, I don't know that I can compare it to discus, but my next one on the list, I have never, ever heard a story of somebody saying that this fish was mean and killed everything in the tank. It's always been super sweet. But then again, I live in my own little bubble, so maybe I just haven't heard it. But I've never heard of an overly aggressive electric blue acara. But I have heard from everyone that's ever seen this fish about how beautiful it is, possibly one of the most beautiful fish in the hobby. And they're just laid back, easygoing. They're just gorgeous. And I'll tell you, a lot of people will confuse them, me included sometimes. If I see a tank full of 2-inch EBAs, yeah, I will confuse them with electric blue Jack Dempsey's.
Yeah. Or
Rams. I'm almost like, which one is that? Because they look so similar. Electric blue Jack Dempsey is a not a fish that we would put on this list, but absolutely stunning. They're so bright, electric blue all the time, under whatever conditions you have. They'll have some of them a little bit of black in them too, but they're so striking. Definitely more striking than angels. Because they're larger, I could say more striking than cribs. I don't know anything about your curviceps, but they make a huge statement, and they're just sweethearts, and they're gorgeous. I don't know where you fall on the tank size recommendations, but for me, I'm still going to go 55 or even larger for those. You can mix them with the fish that we already have on this list, or you can mix them with most of your community fish. Now, this is a bigger one, and it has a bigger cichlid mouth. It's just not really going to use it against other fish. The discus and the angels, their mouths are so teeny tiny, not with electric blue acaras. They're going to be able to open that mouth up wide, but they're not going to do it. They're not going to bother other community fish. But every single fish on this list, if the fish is small enough and they're hungry, it's going to be food. And you know what? Tetras will do that. So it really doesn't matter. It's not a cichlid thing that they'll do that. I'm in love with this fish, and I have thought many times of doing a all electric blue acara tank just because they're stunning.
Yeah. You would have liked this then. In our fish room, I bred electric blue acara. At one point I brought them to the swaps. People bought them. Well, I had one lady, she's like, hey, those electric blue acara you have, they just give me so many babies. I've overrun our local fish stores. Can you take some? I'm like, yeah, sure. Next month she comes in with a bucket. I'm like, all right. So I open the lid. there were like 50 of them in there, about decent size, like 2.5 inches. So I'm like, oh, wow. Okay. I wasn't expecting this many. So I threw them all, believe it or not, I had to throw them all in a 20 long, which looked insane because you had 52-inch electric blue acar, and they were, oh, the personality on that fish. Of all the fish we've talked about so far, best personality so far.
Mm-hmm.
I absolutely agree with you. Of all the fish we've talked about so far, maybe minus the discus, in terms of just overall color impact in your aquarium, I would put them at number 2. I would say with the tank size, I've had them in 40 breeders before. I've had groups in a 40 breeder. I probably wouldn't do any more than a couple in a 40 breeder, but a 55 gallon is a great choice as well. They, like you said, yeah, the mouth is a little bit bigger. I have seen them make some tetras go missing. Definitely no rasboras with those fish, because they will. They're just like you said, with other cichlids, that large enough mouth. Hey, if I'm hungry and there's a snack and it's easy enough to catch, I'll do that. But they get along really well with one another. I had a 125. So actually, they were in a 40 breeder. I moved them to a 125. Had a big group. They did well with one another. They do well with other mellow-ish type cichlids and pretty much most community fish. I don't hesitate to put them in there. And you're getting a really cool centerpiece. And by the way, again, like most of the fish here, really hardy. So, pH anywhere from 6 to 8, water hardness, low single digits up to at least 12 to 15 degrees on your GH and KH. These are fish that, keep them in the upper 70s. They're going to be happy. They eat just about anything you put in a tank. Possibly not 100% plant safe like the fish we've talked about so far. However, I kept them with Anubias. I had Crips in a tank at one point, and they, for the most part, left those alone as well. But it's a gorgeous fish.
Yeah, I was going to ask you. I'm glad you brought that up, because I was going to ask you, where are you at with plants with electric blue acaras? I would say plants that are anchored really well, because they don't necessarily eat them, but they like to do what Oscars do. They'll just tug at them and pull them out, and you'll end up having them float. So if you have plants that like to spread out their roots in the substrate, like Crips, Anubias, that's a great choice. Swords, they'd be fine with. But if you have my favorite, the Rotala, that's just kind of like a dangly toy that they'd probably play with and pick at. But yeah, I mean, that's why I described this one as the one, because I would actually probably put them at number 1 on the list, because you're going to pay a lot less money than you would for discus. They're all blue, where you can get red and pink and white discus and stuff like that. They're all blue, but it's okay, because who doesn't love a blue fish? They're a lot easier to keep. You don't need as big a tank, and you don't go broke keeping them. They're great. I mean, they're possibly the number 1 on this list. And dare I say, a fish that probably any fish keeper that's been keeping fish for longer than 10 years at some point has probably had electric blue acaras, because they're a staple. You have to have them.
Absolutely. So
you're next. Bring up another fish I've never heard
now
of.
I've got the next 2 that I've got, these are not common, but I will say they're insane. All right. They are insane. And it's a genus. It's not just a particular species here. The first one I'm going to talk about is Nanochromis. Now, if you want to see what Nanochromis look like, Joanna on the small scape, she just updated her she just finished her 22 long, and she put 4 Nanochromis transvestitis in this tank. It's a mouthful. If you go to that video, you'll see what these things look like. They're insane. I haven't seen these fish in years, and they showed up on a list. I brought them in, like 75 of them. I threw them in a 20 long, and these fish are beautiful. If you look them up on the internet, put Nanochromis in there, and then if you just start putting TRAV, transvestitis will pop up. These fish they are generally a darker fish with this insane red midsection. The cool thing about them is they stay small. We're looking at a fish that's going to max out right around maybe 2.5 inches. You could put them in a 20 gallon, no problem. Be a little bit careful with trying to put 4, 5, 6 in a 20 gallon. I think in a 20 long, could you get away with 2 pairs? Probably. 1 pair would be better. In the tank right behind me, in the 50 gallon lowboy, I've got 4 of them in there. When they're near each other, if we've got a couple males next to one another, sometimes they'll spar a little bit. The other one The other Nanochromis, and I think the better one, is one that we've had in the fishery before. It's Nanochromis splendens. You want to talk about a fish that is mind-blowing. It has got purple, it's got pink, and again, this tiny little package. By the way, these fish will eat snails, as a lot of cichlids will. In fact, pretty much with the exception of angels and discus, every fish that we've talked about besides those two are going to eat snails. Plant safe. These Nanochromis are plant safe. Again, small tank. They're West African cichlids. You'll see on the internet that, 6 to 7.5 pH. We're keeping them at a pH of 8, and they are thriving. Pretty easy to feed. Great personality in a very tiny package. If you want something, these are not cheap fish. Okay, so I would put them at, so far, the discus are your $80 fish. The Nanochromis, for these tiny little fish, they can easily run $25, $30 a piece. Now, you don't need a bunch of them, but because they're rare, they're very unusual to find Nanochromis in a local fish store. So if you ever find them, especially splendens and the transvestitis, I would get them instantly. I wouldn't even wait. We've got them at the swaps right now, and people who know what they are like, holy cow, haven't seen these in years. Boom, they grab them, but they're not cheap, unfortunately. But
I am looking at them right now because once again, you've done this to me, Jason. I've never heard of these. And wow, that's all I'm going to say. I'm looking at both of them. Wow. And I totally understand now why they're foreign to me, because, I like $8 Oscars and, $6 yellow labs. I typically don't go for the really expensive smaller fish. Lisa does, though, so she would probably absolutely love these. I love them, but I've never had them, and I'm not familiar with them, but they're absolutely gorgeous.
And the thing is, too, I'm just looking at the Google images right now. If you Google image Nanochromis splendens, the best pictures they have do not fully represent just how gorgeous this fish is in real life. And even the transvestitis, take the best pictures you see on the internet. A lot of times people are like, I'm going to up the all the saturation and make these look a lot better. I am not seeing a picture that truly maximizes
the red belly on them, though. Wow.
Yeah.
That is really
actually
cool.
It's funny because I'm seeing the Joanna's video, because she also did a video on Nanochromis splendens. So if you want to know what they look like in a tank, and it was she got some great shots, the small scape. Nanochromis splendens, just type in Nanochromis splendens, the small scape, and there's a video out there for those as well. They are insane. Really cool fish.
It just makes me wonder, with the transvestitis, what were they thinking when they named that fish that?
I don't know. That's why you got to just say it slow and,
What were they thinking when they named that? No, those are absolute stunners. The red belly is striking for sure. I think if I was going to choose between the two, I'm going the splendens all day long, because wow. Yeah. I mean, and if you're telling me, I'm looking at a couple of these pictures and I'm just like, good Lord, if you're telling me that's not even a good representation of that fish, okay. Then I'm in. I'm ready to go. Not going to be something that would mingle well with any of my fish that I keep, but I love them. They're definitely striking. And you're kind of embarrassing me here, because I don't know these fish, and you're pulling out these unbelievable ones, and I'm just talking about the standard ones. But that's me. That's what I do.
Right. But this is a good, nice whole picture sort of. Wait till you see the next ones, because I ain't done yet.
This is why it was such a good idea for me to ask you to become a part of this podcast, because I knew you would bring this to the table. I'm kind of basic, and I like to keep ththings simple. You bring the hardcore stuff, and I like that.
You got some ringers in here too, man.
Well, mine are good, but they're not going to change the world. But you know what? I could say they have changed the world, all of them that I've talked about, because they're some of the most popular fish in the hobby.
And you can find yours in the local fish store.
This is true too. And they don't make you go broke, except this next one is a little bit pricey. I think they've come down a little bit, but I can remember a day when German blue rams were pretty pricey, not to the same level as discus and stuff like that, but German blue rams are another one of those that it's almost automatic. If you talk to somebody that's been keeping fish, what cichlids can go with community fish, this is going to be one of the very first ones that everybody's going to bring up, because they're tiny. They can be kept in the smaller tanks. They're a little bit more finicky as far as their care level than from all of the ones that I've brought up so far, I would put them even more than discus. I would put them, but maybe maybe at the same level as discus. Certainly more difficult to keep than angels and blue acaras, but for a teeny fish, not teeny, but teeny, they're absolutely gorgeous. And there are a few varieties of them. I really like are they the gold ones?
Yeah.
I mean, we're just talking about Ramirez eye here generally, not necessarily just the German blues, but the German blues are probably the most common. I'm not a fan of the balloon ones. I think that's ridiculous, and I don't think that it should be part of this hobby. But the German blues and the gold ones and stuff like that, unbelievable. Very small, easy to find. I don't know where you're at on tank size, but I would be comfortable keeping these in maybe a 29.
20 is fine.
Even a 20 you would say is okay?
Sure.
Yeah. I mean, my instincts tell me 29, but yeah, I mean, 20 gallon is certainly big enough. I love them. I mean, I've always loved them. I've not had the greatest success with them, but I love them. They're cute. They don't bother anybody really. And you can't go wrong. German blue rams all day long. I don't know that I would recommend them as a beginner fish,
No,
but certainly one that will mix in well with community fish.
Yeah, 100% agree. I think the main issue with the German blue ram is, unlike the discus, when people get into discus, they just know, okay, these are going to be fish that require extra care. They start researching the care requirements, and then they realize, oh, I got to keep these warm. What people, because they see the German blue rams at Petco and PetSmart, they think, I'm going to grab this fish and chuck it in my tank, not realizing that one of the main reasons these fish don't do well is they too like 83, 84 degrees. I tell people all the time, if you're looking for a great fish to keep with discus, boom, a German blue ram, similar water parameters. And they ideally, it's nice if you have that pH around 6, 6.5, maybe 7. Like for me, pH kicking at 8, not the best for them. For me, they kind of just burn out after a few months and then wind up dying. And even when I keep them on the warmer side, but they need to be kept warm. And so just like the discus, you may run into some stocking option headaches a little bit. You know, you're not going to want to keep them with fish that are like, hey, I really prefer the low 70s. Like some of the Cory cats where they're like, man, you push them at 83, they're not going to make it. But
right.
Most of your tetras, your cardinal tetras, your neon types, those are going to be great. Your rummy nose tetras are a really good option. There are some Cory cats that like to be kept a little bit warmer. There are some plecos that like to be kept a little bit warmer. So those might be options for you, but you got to keep them warm. Softer, more acidic water is better, although the softer and more acidic water isn't 100% necessary, but the warm temperatures are nice. And again, it's a plant safe fish. It's one of the smaller, the Manacromas I just mentioned are very tiny, but the German blue rams would probably be, so far, the cribs are pretty small too, about the same size as a crib lengthwise, but their mouths are smaller than the cribs. So very rare that you're going to see those things just start chomping on other fish.
I've never heard of a ram terrorizing a tank. I mean, I've just never heard it. So I've never heard of a ram even picking off fry and stuff like that because they're so tiny. I don't even know that they could do it. So yeah, they won't hurt a fly, but they will hurt you if you don't care for them properly. They're a little bit more finicky, but a stunner for sure. Stunning fish in a very small package. You got to love that. So what's your last one that's going to blow my mind here?
The next one that I have is it's a genus, and it's called Dichrosis. So again, Google these fish. It's a genus. So you've got a number of different types. If you type in Dichrosis in Google Images, as I'm going to do right here, Dichrosis, you've got a number of different types. I have kept the filamentosus. I have kept the maculatus. The common name is the checkerboard cichlid. I have been in fish rooms where they had the Worzelli. These are gorgeous fish. And what makes them so amazing is the finnage. They're tiny. These are generally, not all, but most of them are very tiny, like 2-3 inches max. They're a thin bodied fish. And somewhere in one of my fish room tour videos, and I have no idea, it was probably in 2020 or 2021, I had about a dozen of these quarantining in a 10-gallon tank. And even at about 1.25 inches, they looked like the pictures you will see, the filamentaceous, that is, looked like the pictures that you see on these Google images. If you do that, they're insane. And the iridescence in their fins and the long trailers that they get in their tail fin and their dorsal fin are magnificent. These are amazing fish. They stay small. So just like the nanochromas we talked about earlier, you got a 20-gallon, you're going to be fine. I find them to be relatively mellow. They tolerate one another pretty well. They're plant safe. Your tetras, even rasboras, your medium-sized rasboras are going to be fine. Your cory cats are okay. So this is, again, not a cheap fish and really not easy to find. In some ways, I would put them at like nanochromis level, where it's like, if I were to see them on an import list, boom, I'm buying them instantly. And I have been looking and looking, and I can't. And Joanna's been wanting them forever. She's like, when are you going to get the checkerboards? When are you? And I'm like, I can't find them. I cannot find them on the wholesale list. I can't find them on the import list. If I ever do, I'll bring them in. But they are gorgeous fish. If you're looking for a stunner that's small, you can't do a whole lot better than those.
Yeah, I'm looking at that. This is a fish I have seen before, another stunner. But I don't have anything to offer to the conversation because I've never kept them. But absolutely gorgeous. I'm looking at one that the photo is labeled with aqua addiction, and it is striking. Absolutely beautiful. And I just want to add something I can add to this conversation. If you're wondering why I don't put pictures up and stuff like that, it's because the overwhelming majority of people that give us feedback on this podcast are telling us that they just listen to it either on a podcasting app, or they just put it on YouTube and they just listen to it. So it's really not going to help anybody. Plus, if we're referring to pictures, that's not fair to the people that are only listening to it in audio. So that's why I don't do that. But Jason has given you the things to search for because his fish are so obscure and we don't know them off the top of our heads. If you want to search for them like I did, they're certainly easy to find. Now, my last one, was that your last one or do you have more?
I have a bonus one. So if you want to go blah, 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 I almost said this. I almost said it. If you want to talk about yours, I do have one bonus, and then I think we can wrap it up.
You almost spoiled the surprise of my last one.
I did.
No, this one will surprise a lot of people because I believe it's a fish that's slept on a lot. I don't hear a lot of people talking about it. I don't know why. It's certainly not as striking as the other fish that we've talked about on this from a color standpoint, but their personality, their activity level, their shape and all of that, I think they're wonderful, and they certainly mix in. They'll even mix in with your wild spastic fish like danios and stuff like that. I'm talking about the German blue ram's big brother, the Bolivian ram. These are significantly larger. I'd say triple in size, if not more, than their little brothers. Significantly larger, so less of a threat of abuse from other fish. And they can take a beating if they need to, and they could probably dish one out if they needed to. What do you say? What do they get? Maybe a maximum of like 4 inches, or is that stretching?
I've seen them 4 inches. It's unusual. It takes a while for them to get to that size. I mean, a lot of times you buy them in a pet store, they're 1.25 inches, 1.5 inches, and most people might get them to go 2.5, 3 inches. But I have had them over 3 inches, and I've seen them at closer to 4.
Yeah, and one of the things I love about them is that they will come to you. They'll come to you when you walk up to the tank, like an African cichlid would. Whereas a German blue ram, not so much. They're going to kind of be like, what is that? And they're going to kind of hide, and they'll come out when food comes. But Bolivians are right up there shaking their tail, excited to see you. They don't have the same coloration as the German blue rams, but that's okay because they're still a beautiful fish. They look exactly the same from a shape standpoint and finnage and all of that, but they're just bigger and they're not bright blue. But I love them. I've always been a big fan of those. And I would dare to say I am more of a fan of them than I am German blues, mainly because in my experience, maybe it's different for you, Jason, they've been easier to keep than the German blue rams. So cheap to buy, not, nickels and dimes, but they're not expensive. not as easy to find because they're just not as sought after as the German blues. But I like bigger fish, so these are going to get bigger. They're not going to get big like an Oscar, but they're bigger. I love that about them. I love their personality. They're just so happy and rambunctious. They can hang with the crazy fish. Yeah, absolute winner. Bolivian rams. Check them out. That's all I have to say about those.
Yeah, I've kept them in. I've had breeding groups in a 20 long that fit in really well. I think I had them in with some guppies, but they'll go with the tetras and, just your typical community fish. The nice thing about them is, unlike the German blue, you don't have to keep them warm. So as long as you are in the mid to upper 70s, they're happy. They can, I was breeding them at a pH close to 8. So they're not finicky like the German blue rams when it comes to water parameters. They don't mind the harder water. The interesting thing is I had a 75 gallon and I had a male Bolivian ram. That fish terrorized an Actorictes heckelei. They looked the same, like similar, right? And that heckelei was probably a 7.5-inch fish. He was a big boy. And that little Bolivian ram would chase him all over that 75 gallon. No fin nipping, nothing like, he didn't have him up in a corner or anything. But I was like, I'm looking at this heckelei, which is a big South American cichlid. I'm like, dude, what is wrong with you, man? You're being terrorized by this. The Bolivian ram at that point was maybe 2.5 inches, and he would just shoot them all, going all over the tank. And I'm like, wow, that's crazy. But other than that one time, the rest of them have been really peaceful, and they accept a wide range of foods, easy to keep. Yeah, they're really cool fish.
I did a video recently on the KG Tropicals channel about how, even the fish that everybody says is the nicest fish in the world can go nasty sometimes. I mean, somebody commented on there that they heard from an old timer that 1 out of every 1,000 fish has a killer instinct inside of them that they just turn. And that makes total sense because, there's serial killer human beings out there. That doesn't mean everybody is capable of being a serial killer. Every once in a while you get a bad seed and they can cause those kind of problems. I personally have not experienced that with Bolivians. I've always found them to be super sweet and not bothering anybody, but that's just my experience. And everybody's experiences are different, but love that fish. I was going to recommend a 29 for them because they do get a little bit bigger, but did you say you've kept them in 20s? Okay.
Yeah, I had a breeding pair in a 20 and they spent their whole lives there, and it worked out well because even though, again, it's still a fish that's most of the time only going to max out around 3 inches. They're not flying around the tank usually like crazy active. They're one of those fish, just like the German blue rams where, it's cool because the way they swim, they're constantly fluttering their fins. And then their dorsal fin is always erect. But in terms of just like being really crazy and super active, they're not. They're mostly slow, methodical swimmers, so they don't need a ton of space. But yeah, it worked out just fine in a 20.
I think my go-to is always 29s. It's not like I'm against 20s and all of that. I've got a 20 gallon in my bathroom and I look in it every day and I love it. And I don't know. It's just kind of like instinct in me. It's like 29. You want to keep that as a 29 gallon every single time. But I don't know. That's a problem. I'll work on that. I'll get better. I promise.
You try hard. Now I do have my bonus fish.
I want to hear it. I'm excited.
I have to include this. This would be perfectly fine for a community, but I would say a community tank that has larger inhabitants, and that's the Geophagus. So
okay.
I can't believe I didn't have them on my like regular list, but if you're watching on YouTube, I've got the Geophagus tank right here. They're in there with rainbow fish, glass cats, there's some giant Danios in there, clown loaches. So if you've got medium-sized tetras, Buenos Aires, candy cane tetras, maybe even lemon tetras, they don't really go after other fish. They mostly sift sand. Some of them get larger, like the Tapajos might max out about 5 inches. The wine milleri, the Cernamensis types, they can go 8 to 9 inches. So you do want a larger tank. I would recommend at least a 75 gallon, if not a 6-foot tank. Generally speaking, in a 6-foot tank especially, you can keep multiples. I've got a half a dozen in my 125. I suspect they're going to be just fine. They have albino versions of some of them, which are absolutely gorgeous.
Love it.
Tons of color. The finnage is awesome. Probably, of all the fish we talked about, the slowest growing fish. You have to have patience. So if you find a 2 or 3 inch Geophagus, it might take 6, 7, 8 years to get them to go full size. but they are absolutely amazing fish, relatively hardy. They don't require any super uncommon water parameters or temperatures or anything like that. Eat pretty much just about everything, but they are sand sifters, so try to keep them off of gravel if you can.
For you to bring up, what? I'm sorry, my brain is melting down on here. For you to bring up Geophagus is kind of like me bringing up Oscars. It's
Right.
like,
Yeah.
that's your fish. That's on your logo. Like that is your favorite. But I absolutely love them too. And I've said it before. I'll say it again. I'm not afraid of you. I'll say it to your face. They have that look that just makes me go, oh, like I can't explain it. They're absolutely gorgeous, but there's something about them that just makes me go, oh, aren't they sweet? Like,
Bless
I don't
their
know.
heart.
Yeah, they're just, bless them. They're just so cute. But yeah, I love Geos. And I think it's fun to call them Geos instead of Geophagus, because one of my favorite pitchers in the major leagues was Gio Gonzalez. But anyway, yeah, I'm surprised that wasn't your first one on your list, to be honest.
I was trying to stay with stuff that would be, if we're talking about community, things that would fit into your typical 20 or 29 gallon aquariums and not go super crazy with the tank sizes. But that one is a must if you've got larger community fish, Congo tetras, Colombian tetras, that kind of thing.
That's another one that I've just never heard. Like, man, I had this one terrorist, Geophagus, that just, I haven't heard that story. Maybe they're out there, but I haven't heard that story. So
No, they're pretty mellow.
I have a long list of fish I keep that all have stories like that. So it's refreshing to see a beautiful fish like that makes you go, oh, and it's also really sweet. So
Yeah.
I think it's a good list, Adams. I think we did good here. And I hope that gives everybody a good idea of fish that they can easily intermingle with their community type fish. Cichlid does not mean death. It does not mean, tyrant in the tank. Can be, but then again, there can be tetras that do that too. So, if you stick with these fish, you should have some pretty good success with keeping those with community fish.
So everybody, really appreciate you being here. If you've got a favorite cichlid that you just absolutely love for your community tank, as always, let us know what that is. Leave it in the comments section below. We really appreciate you being here, and we will be back same time, same place next week. Thanks for being here.
My brain has been farting so much today.
It's just